Snow drifted across the Chicago sidewalk while Ethan Cole stood trembling outside First National Bank holding an envelope stuffed with $50,000 that could have changed his daughter's entire life. Cars hissed through slush nearby. Neon lights reflected across wet streets. His fingers were numb from cold and exhaustion after another 14-hour shift unloading trucks at a warehouse that barely paid enough to keep the heat running in his apartment. Inside the envelope sat temptation powerful enough to break almost anyone. Medical bills, past due rent notices, his daughter Lucy's overdue surgery payment. One decision could erase all of it. Have you ever stared at a problem so painful that doing the right thing felt almost impossible? Ethan closed his eyes tightly before walking back into the bank. I think someone dropped this, he told the stunned teller quietly. The young woman blinked repeatedly at the thick envelope. Sir, there's $50,000 in here. I know, you didn't take anything. Ethan almost laughed at the question. Because hunger changes people, but love changes them more. It's not mine, he answered simply. What Ethan didn't know was that someone across the lobby had watched the entire thing happen. Victoria Mercer, 42 years old, billionaire founder of Mercer Holdings. Famous across Chicago for building one of the country's largest real estate empires after surviving poverty as a teenager. Powerful, brilliant, emotionally untouchable. She had accidentally dropped the envelope minutes earlier while rushing through a private banking meeting. And now she couldn't stop staring at the exhausted single father returning enough money to rescue his own collapsing life. Most people around her lied for far less. But something about Ethan unsettled her deeply. Not because he returned the money. Because he looked desperate enough not to. Outside the bank, Victoria quietly watched him walk through falling snow toward a rusted pickup truck that coughed smoke into the freezing air. Then she made a decision she couldn't fully explain. She followed him. What would you do if someone's honesty forced you to question everything you believed about people? 30 minutes later, Victoria parked across from a small apartment building on Chicago's south side. Paint peeled from the walls. Half the windows were patched with plastic against the winter cold. This was where the man who returned $50,000 lived. She watched Ethan climb the stairs carrying grocery bags and a tiny stuffed dinosaur missing one eye. Then the apartment door flew open. Daddy, a little girl with curly brown hair launched herself into his arms instantly. Ethan laughed softly despite visible exhaustion. Easy, Lucy Bug. You got soup? She asked hopefully. And grilled cheese. The child grinned like he had delivered treasure. Victoria remained frozen inside her car. Because she suddenly realized something painful. Nobody had ever looked that happy to see her. Not investors. Not employees. Not even the men she once dated who loved proximity to power more than her actual existence. Upstairs, Ethan tucked Lucy beneath blankets while rain mixed with snow against the windows. You coughing again? He asked gently. Lucy nodded weakly. Only a little. Fear flashed briefly across his face before he forced a smile. The surgery couldn't wait much longer. Hospital bills already swallowed everything. Yet he still returned the money. Have you ever met someone whose quiet integrity made your own success suddenly feel empty? The next morning, Ethan nearly dropped his coffee when Victoria Mercer walked into the warehouse loading dock wearing a dark wool coat and heels completely unsuited for the dirty concrete floors. His manager panicked instantly. Ms. Mercer, we didn't know. I'm here for him, she interrupted softly, eyes fixed on Ethan. Workers nearby stared openly. Ethan stepped forward cautiously. Did something happen? Victoria held out the envelope again. You forgot your reward. I don't want one. Why? The question carried genuine confusion. Because Victoria spent years believing everybody wanted something. Ethan looked down briefly. My daughter watches everything I do. His voice softened. I can't teach her honesty only matters when life is easy. The words hit her harder than expected. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Victoria quietly asked, can I meet her? That evening she climbed the narrow apartment stairs carrying groceries Ethan repeatedly insisted they didn't need. Lucy opened the door wearing oversized pajamas and instantly gasped. You're the fancy lady from TV. Victoria laughed unexpectedly. A real laugh. Small but genuine. Lucy pointed toward the couch proudly. Dad fixed the springs himself. Ethan sighed tiredly. You don't have to narrate our poverty, Bug. But Victoria noticed something strange inside the apartment. Warmth. Photographs covered the walls. Homemade birthday decorations still hung near the kitchen despite Christmas being weeks away. Lucis drawings covered the refrigerator. Life existed here. Messy, imperfect, real. During dinner, Lucy suddenly asked Victoria, "Do billionaires get lonely?" The room fell silent. Ethan looked horrified. "Lucy, no," Victoria whispered softly. "It's okay." But she couldn't answer immediately, because the truth sat painfully in her chest. Finally she admitted quietly, "Sometimes very lonely." Lucy nodded thoughtfully while dipping grilled cheese into tomato soup. "Dad gets lonely too after Mom died." Ethan lowered his eyes instantly. Victoria watched him carefully, and suddenly she understood why he returned the money. Not because life treated him kindly. Because grief had already taught him what truly mattered before it was too late. Later that night, Victoria prepared to leave when she noticed Lucy asleep against Ethan's shoulder on the couch. The little girl's tiny hand still held his shirt tightly even in sleep. Ethan looked exhausted beyond words. But peaceful too, loved. And standing there inside that tiny apartment filled with struggle, soup, and quiet devotion, Victoria Mercer finally understood something her billions never taught her. The richest people in the world are not always the ones with the most money. Sometimes they are simply the ones who still have someone waiting at home excited to see them walk through the door. 3 weeks later, freezing rain covered Chicago in silver reflections while Ethan Cole sat inside St. Mary's Hospital staring helplessly at the surgery estimate trembling in his hands. The numbers blurred together through exhaustion. $48,000, almost the exact amount he returned at the bank. Lucy slept quietly nearby with oxygen tubes beneath her small nose, her pale fingers wrapped around the stuffed dinosaur Ethan repaired 3 separate times already. Doctors said the surgery needed to happen within days now, or her condition could become permanent. Have you ever reached the point where life feels cruel enough to mock your honesty directly? Ethan rubbed both hands over his face slowly. He had already sold his truck, taken double shifts, skipped meals. Nothing came close to enough. A nurse entered softly. "Mr. Cole, there's someone here for you." Ethan looked up in confusion. Victoria Mercer stood quietly in the hallway holding 2 paper coffee cups while rainwater dripped from her black coat. "You followed me again?" he asked weakly. A faint smile crossed her face. This time the hospital receptionist helped. She handed him coffee before sitting beside him silently. For several minutes neither spoke. Only the steady beep of Lucis' monitor filled the room. Then Victoria finally looked toward the sleeping child carefully. "She's scared, isn't she?" Ethan nodded slowly. "But she keeps pretending she's brave for me." His voice cracked slightly on the last word. "Because single parents rarely allow themselves to collapse completely. Someone still depends on them breathing tomorrow." Victoria stared at Lucy quietly before speaking again. "You know," she hesitated. "When I was 11, my mother died because we couldn't afford treatment." Ethan turned toward her surprised. "I never told anyone that publicly," she admitted softly. "Afterward, I promised myself I'd become so rich nobody I loved would ever suffer like that again." The hospital lights reflected against tears forming in her eyes now. "But somewhere along the way," she whispered, "I became obsessed with surviving instead of living." Ethan listened silently, not judging, just present. And somehow that simple presence made her feel safer than luxury ever did. What would you do if a stranger understood your pain better than the people who knew you for years? The next morning, Ethan nearly collapsed when hospital administrators informed him Lucis' surgery had been fully paid anonymously overnight. Every cent. He immediately knew. "No," he whispered firmly. "I can't accept that." Victoria stood near the hallway windows overlooking the rainy city. "Yes, you can. I returned your money because it was right. And I helped your daughter because it was right," she answered quietly. Ethan stared at her helplessly. "Why?" Victoria's voice softened painfully. "Because you reminded me that kindness still exists without contracts attached to it." Silence stretched between them. Then Lucis' small voice interrupted weakly from the bed. "Dad." They both turned instantly. Lucy smiled sleepily at Victoria. "Are rich people allowed to cry?" Victoria laughed softly through tears. "Apparently we are." The surgery lasted 6 terrifying hours. Ethan paced hospital corridors endlessly while memories attacked him from every direction. Lucy learning to walk. Lucy crying after her mother's funeral. Lucy whispering one night, "Please don't leave me too." Fear hollowed him completely, because loving someone deeply means understanding how unbearable losing them would feel. Finally, the surgeon emerged still wearing scrubs. It went well. Ethan broke instantly. Not dramatic, not loud, just quiet sobbing from a man who spent too many years pretending strength meant hiding pain. Victoria hugged him tightly while nurses passed through the hallway pretending not to notice. And for the first time since his wife died, Ethan didn't feel completely alone carrying the weight of life. Days later, snow melted slowly outside Lucy's recovery room while sunlight finally touched the city again. Lucy sat upright coloring pictures when she suddenly looked at Victoria seriously. "Can I ask something important?" "Of course. Why did you really follow Dad home that night?" Victoria paused, then answered honestly, "Because I thought people like him didn't exist anymore." Ethan looked away awkwardly, but Lucy smiled proudly. "I told you my dad's special." Victoria laughed quietly. "Yes," she whispered, "you did." Before leaving the hospital that evening, Victoria handed Ethan a small envelope. Inside was a job offer. Not charity. Director of Community Housing Development for Mercer Holdings. A position helping struggling families avoid homelessness. Ethan looked stunned. "Why me?" "Because people trust men who understand suffering," she answered simply. Outside the hospital, the city glowed gold beneath the setting sun while traffic moved endlessly through Chicago streets. For a moment, the three of them stood together in peaceful silence. Not billionaire, not warehouse worker, not lonely strangers separated by money. Just human beings carrying scars life gave them. Then Lucy reached for both their hands simultaneously. And neither adult pulled away. Have you ever noticed how children instinctively build bridges adults are too afraid to cross? As snow melted from rooftops and warm light stretched across the city skyline, Victoria Mercer realized something that changed her forever. Money can buy medicine. It can buy buildings. It can buy influence powerful enough to shape entire cities. But the most valuable things in life, trust, love, honesty, and human connection, can only be earned by the way you choose to treat people when nobody is watching.